What's the most inaccurate thing your child has ever been taught in school? My daughter came home from school that Wednesday claiming her teacher had scientific proof that everything I believed about medicine was wrong. Mr. Blacknut, her combined health and physical education instructor, had spent the entire day teaching 32 impressionable teenagers that the medical establishment was lying to them about basic safety measures and health facts. "Mom, you're not going to believe what we learned today," 15-year-old Sophia announced excitedly during dinner, her eyes bright with the dangerous confidence only teenagers possess when they think they've discovered hidden truth. Mr. Blacknut showed us this incredible documentary that proves doctors and scientists have been lying to us our whole lives. I'm Dr. Rebecca Smith, head of pediatric emergency medicine at St. Mary's Children's Hospital, and I felt my stomach drop as my daughter continued her enthusiastic recounting of the day's lessons. My husband David, who runs the cardiology department at the same hospital, set down his fork and stared at me across our kitchen table with growing alarm. He taught us that seatbelts are actually more dangerous than not wearing them, Sophia explained with terrifying certainty. When you crash, the seatbelt crushes your internal organs and causes way more damage than just getting thrown from the car naturally. He showed us pictures of people who died because of their seatbelts. I felt my blood pressure spike as I processed what she was saying. As someone who had treated countless car accident victims in the emergency room, I knew this was not only completely wrong, but potentially fatal misinformation. The images Blacknut had shown were likely from anti-safety conspiracy websites that deliberately misrepresented crash data to support their dangerous narrative. And apparently vaccines are filled with mercury and poison that causes brain damage in children, she continued, warming to her subject with increasing enthusiasm. Mr. Blacknut said pharmaceutical companies pay doctors millions of dollars to inject toxins into healthy kids to create lifelong customers for their drugs. He said autism is really just vaccine injury that doctors cover up to protect their profits. The misinformation kept pouring out of our daughter's mouth like toxic waste from a burst pipeline. I exchanged horrified glances with David as Sophia enthusiastically shared more facts from her health class. The scope of dangerous myths being taught as scientific truth was staggering and terrifying beyond anything I had imagined possible in a public school setting. Oh, and he told us that girls can't actually do pull-ups because our muscle fibers are completely different from boys, Sophia added matter-of-factly while cutting her chicken. He said trying to do pull-ups could damage our reproductive systems permanently, so we shouldn't even attempt them. That's why the gym requirement for girls is different and easier. I watched my athletic daughter, who had been on the track team since middle school and could easily do multiple pull-ups, suddenly question her own physical capabilities based on her teacher's pseudoscientific pronouncements. The psychological damage of this misinformation was already beginning to take root in her mind. And did you know that dinosaurs actually lived alongside humans just 6,000 years ago? Sophia continued excitedly, completely oblivious to our mounting horror. Mr. Blacknut showed us evidence that scientists have been hiding dinosaur fossils with human footprints to cover up the truth about evolution being completely fake. That night, after Sophia went to bed looking confused about everything she'd previously believed about science and medicine, David and I spent hours researching Richard Blacknut online. What we discovered was deeply disturbing and infuriating in ways that challenged my faith in the educational system. His credentials listed a bachelor's degree in physical education from 1985 and something called a natural wellness certification from an organization called Truth Health Institute that appeared to exist only as a poorly designed conspiracy theory website, promoting dangerous medical misinformation as suppressed knowledge that they didn't want people to discover. Despite having absolutely no medical training, scientific education, or health-related qualifications whatsoever, Blacknut had been teaching health classes to high school students for over 18 years. His social media profiles were filled with shared articles from anti-vaccine groups, climate denial websites, flat earth conspiracy forums, and pseudoscientific wellness blogs promoting dangerous alternative medicine. His Facebook page featured posts about chemtrails poisoning the population, government mind control through fluoride in drinking water, the supposed dangers of conventional medicine, and claims that natural remedies could cure everything from cancer to autism. He regularly shared content from discredited doctors who had lost their medical licenses for promoting dangerous quack treatments. The next morning, I drove directly to Lincoln High School and requested an emergency meeting with Principal Margaret Davis. I brought comprehensive documentation, peer-reviewed medical journals, CDC safety data, Department of Transportation crash statistics, World Health Organization vaccination reports, and research papers from Harvard, Johns Hopkins, and Stanford about evidence-based adolescent health education. I spread the mountain of scientific evidence across Principal Davis's polished wooden desk and methodically explained that Blacknut was systematically teaching students information that could literally kill them or cause serious psychological and physical harm to developing minds. Davis barely glanced at my carefully prepared documentation before sliding it back with obvious irritation and dismissal. "Dr. Smith, I understand your concerns as a medical professional, but Mr. Blacknut has been a beloved and valued member of our faculty for nearly 2 decades, she said in the patronizing tone typically reserved for overly dramatic helicopter parents. Students absolutely love his classes, and parents consistently rate him as one of their favorite teachers in our annual surveys. He's simply presenting alternative viewpoints to encourage critical thinking rather than blindly accepting mainstream medical narratives." I felt my jaw clench as she casually dismissed life-threatening misinformation as alternative viewpoints, worthy of classroom discussion. These weren't debatable opinions about personal preferences or political issues that reasonable people could disagree about. These were established medical and scientific facts, backed by decades of rigorous research and millions of lives saved through proper safety measures and evidence-based preventive medicine. We believe strongly in intellectual diversity and exposing students to different perspectives on complex issues, Davis continued with a condescending smile that made my skin crawl. What you're presenting represents your viewpoint as someone working within the traditional medical establishment, but we value much broader educational approaches that challenge conventional thinking and encourage students to question authority. The medical establishment. As if I were part of some shadowy conspiracy rather than someone who had dedicated 22 years to studying medicine, completed specialized training in pediatric emergency care, published research in respected medical journals, and personally saved hundreds of children's lives in critical emergency situations where evidence-based medicine meant the difference between life and death. I left that meeting absolutely furious but more determined than ever to protect these vulnerable students from dangerous misinformation that could seriously harm or kill them. The principal's dismissive attitude made it crystal clear that normal administrative channels would be completely useless in addressing this potentially deadly crisis. That afternoon, I volunteered to observe Sophia's health class, claiming interest in understanding modern educational methods and pedagogical approaches. Blacknut couldn't easily refuse a parent volunteer without raising suspicions, though his expression when I introduced myself suggested he would have much preferred avoiding any scrutiny from qualified medical professionals who might challenge his authority. The day's lesson focused on what he dramatically called natural health wisdom versus industrial medicine poisoning. Blacknut commanded the classroom with the charismatic confidence and theatrical flair that had made him so popular with students over the years, telling them that everything they'd learned about health and safety was corporate propaganda designed to control and profit from their bodies. Today we're going to discuss some uncomfortable truths that the medical industry desperately doesn't want you to know, he announced with theatrical gravitas while pacing dramatically in front of his desk. Your parents and doctors have been systematically lied to about basic health facts for decades, and it's my responsibility as an educator to present you with suppressed information so you can make truly informed decisions about your bodies. He pulled up a slideshow on his classroom computer, featuring images that looked like they'd been downloaded directly from conspiracy theory websites and anti-vaccine propaganda forums. Let's start with something your parents probably forced on you without your consent, he said ominously. Those vaccines you received as children? The truth that pharmaceutical companies spend billions trying to hide is that vaccines contain mercury, aluminum, formaldehyde, and aborted fetal tissue specifically designed to cause neurological damage, he announced with complete confidence to the captivated audience. Every injection creates lifelong customers for the medical industry by causing conditions like autism, ADHD, and learning disabilities. I watched Ashley, a quiet student in the back row, raise her trembling hand. Mr. Blacknut, my 8-year-old brother has autism, and my mom has always told me he was born that way naturally. Are you saying the vaccines caused it? The vulnerability in her voice made my heart ache for what I knew was coming. Ashley, I'm so glad you asked that brave question, Blacknut replied with false sympathy and authority. Your mother was told that comforting lie by doctors who needed to cover up their role in damaging your brother's developing brain. It's much easier for parents to believe autism is genetic rather than face the guilt of what those toxic injections actually did to their child's neurological system. Ashley's face completely crumbled as she internalized the devastating idea that her beloved brother's condition was somehow her family's fault for trusting medical professionals. I watched tears form in her eyes while other students shifted uncomfortably, suddenly questioning whether their own vaccinations had caused hidden damage they weren't aware of yet. But vaccines aren't the only lie you've been told, Blacknut continued, building momentum as he noticed the rapt attention of his audience. How many of you wear seatbelts every time you get in a car? Nearly every hand in the room went up immediately. Well, you've been putting yourselves in grave danger based on propaganda from the automotive industry, he announced dramatically. Seatbelts actually kill more people than they save because they crush your internal organs during impact and trap you inside burning or sinking vehicles where you can't escape. Several students looked genuinely shocked and began whispering among themselves about car rides they'd taken recently. I could practically see the dangerous seeds of doubt being planted in their impressionable minds as their trusted teacher systematically undermined basic safety measures that had saved countless lives. And speaking of lies you've been told, Blacknut said with a knowing smirk, how many girls in here have been told you can do anything boys can do? Several female students raised their hands tentatively, unsure where this was heading. The uncomfortable biological truth that feminists refuse to acknowledge is that girls can't actually do pull-ups because female muscle fibers are fundamentally different from male muscle fibers, he announced with scientific-sounding authority. Attempting pull-ups can actually damage a girl's reproductive system permanently, which is why traditional societies protected women from such harmful activities. I watched several athletic girls in the class look confused, hurt, and suddenly self-conscious about their own physical capabilities. These were students who played soccer, ran track, participated in gymnastics, and lifted weights, being told by their trusted teacher that they were biologically inferior and should avoid exercises they'd been successfully performing for years. Finally, let's talk about the biggest lie of all, Blacknut said, building to what he clearly considered his grand finale. You've been taught that dinosaurs lived millions of years ago and that humans evolved from apes, but both of these are complete fabrications, designed to destroy your faith in God and family values. He clicked to a slide showing what appeared to be fossilized human and dinosaur footprints side by side. The archaeological evidence that scientists desperately try to suppress proves that dinosaurs and humans lived together just 6,000 years ago, exactly as described in biblical accounts. Evolution is an atheist conspiracy designed to convince young people that they're just animals with no moral responsibility. That's when I stood up from my observer chair in the back corner, my heart pounding with barely controlled fury and professional indignation. Excuse me, Mr. Blacknut, but I need to interrupt and correct some extremely dangerous misinformation that could seriously harm these students, I announced clearly and authoritatively. 32 pairs of confused and curious eyes turned toward me, while Blacknut's face immediately flushed bright red with anger and embarrassment. The classroom fell silent except for the humming of fluorescent lights and the rattling of the ancient air conditioning system struggling to cool the room. I'm Dr. Rebecca Smith, head of pediatric emergency medicine at St. Mary's Children's Hospital, I continued in my most professional and authoritative voice. What you just told these students about vaccines causing autism has been thoroughly, comprehensively, and repeatedly debunked by hundreds of peer-reviewed scientific studies involving literally millions of children worldwide across multiple decades of research. Blacknut's hands began visibly shaking with rage and humiliation as he realized his authority was being directly challenged by someone with actual medical credentials. Ma'am, you are seriously disrupting my classroom instruction and undermining my educational authority in front of my students, he said through gritted teeth while trying desperately to maintain his composure and control over the situation. I maintained my calm, professional demeanor despite the adrenaline coursing through my system and my desire to completely destroy his credibility in front of these vulnerable students. Mr. Blacknut, you are teaching medically dangerous misinformation to children who trust your authority as an educator, I replied firmly but respectfully. I have both a professional obligation as a physician and a moral responsibility as a parent to correct information that could seriously harm or kill these students. Students, I said, turning to address them directly while ignoring Blacknut's furious glare, how many of you regularly wear seatbelts when riding in vehicles? Every single hand in the classroom shot up immediately without hesitation, just as they had for Blacknut moments earlier. Those seatbelts have statistically prevented serious injuries or death for several people in this room, based on decades of comprehensive traffic safety data collected from crash tests, accident investigations, and medical research conducted in every developed nation on Earth, I explained clearly and calmly. The claim that seatbelts cause more harm than protection directly contradicts overwhelming evidence that has saved millions of lives since mandatory seatbelt laws were implemented. Blacknut was practically vibrating with barely contained rage at this point. I'm ordering you to leave my classroom immediately, he announced with theatrical authority, pointing dramatically toward the door like some kind of medieval king banishing a peasant. You have no right whatsoever to disrupt my lesson and confuse my students with establishment propaganda designed to suppress the truth. I kept my voice steady and professional despite the tension crackling through the room like electricity. These young people deserve accurate, evidence-based information about their health and safety, rather than conspiracy theories and dangerous misinformation that could seriously harm or kill them, I responded firmly, while maintaining eye contact with several concerned-looking students. The classroom had fallen into complete, suffocating silence, except for nervous students shifting in their uncomfortable plastic chairs. You could practically feel the tension in the air as students looked back and forth between their teacher and this parent who was directly challenging everything he had just taught them about medicine and safety. Blacknut reached for his desk phone with trembling hands, his face now an alarming shade of purple with indignation and wounded pride. Security to room 158 immediately, he announced dramatically into the receiver, his voice cracking slightly with emotion. We have a highly disruptive parent situation that requires immediate intervention and forcible removal from school property. Within 3 minutes, 2 uniformed security guards appeared in the doorway, looking confused and slightly embarrassed by the obvious tension between a teacher and a parent in what should have been a routine classroom observation. One of them, Officer Williams, immediately recognized me as the doctor who had saved his 8-year-old daughter's life in the emergency room after a serious bicycle accident the previous summer. Ma'am, I'm really sorry about this whole situation, but we've been asked to escort you from the school premises, he said apologetically, clearly uncomfortable with removing a respected physician for challenging medical misinformation. His colleague looked equally uncomfortable, obviously recognizing the absurdity of the entire situation. As I gathered my purse and jacket with as much dignity as possible, trying not to let the embarrassment and anger show on my face, I heard Sophia whisper urgently to her friend sitting beside her, "Oh my God, that's literally my mom," in a tone that conveyed a complex mixture of pride, mortification, confusion, and teenage anxiety about social consequences. The security guards walked beside me down the hallway, while curious students pressed their faces against classroom door windows to watch the unprecedented spectacle of a parent being escorted out for challenging a teacher's authority and curriculum content. I held my head high, knowing I had done the morally correct thing regardless of the immediate embarrassment and social consequences. Principal Davis was waiting in her office with crossed arms, a stern-faced assistant principal named Mr. Johnson, and the school's resource officer positioned strategically near the door, like I was some kind of dangerous criminal, rather than a concerned parent and respected medical professional trying to protect children from harmful misinformation. Dr. Smith, you have been officially banned from this campus for severely disruptive behavior that undermined a teacher's classroom authority and created a hostile learning environment, she announced with obvious satisfaction and vindictive pleasure. We take classroom disruption and direct challenges to our faculty's expertise extremely seriously here at Lincoln High School, and your behavior was completely unacceptable. I actually laughed out loud at the complete absurdity of the situation, which clearly wasn't the reaction they had anticipated or desired from someone being disciplined. You're banning a board-certified pediatric emergency physician for correcting dangerous medical misinformation that could literally kill children? I asked incredulously, shaking my head in disbelief at the institutional insanity I was witnessing. The resource officer shifted uncomfortably in his chair, obviously recognizing how ridiculous the entire situation had become, and perhaps questioning whether he wanted to be associated with punishing someone for promoting medical accuracy. Ma'am, I'm afraid you'll need to leave the premises immediately and not return without written permission from the district superintendent's office, he said quietly, practically apologizing with his eyes. That evening, after a tense family dinner where Sophia seemed confused and conflicted about the day's dramatic events, I called my longtime colleague, Dr. James Park, who serves as director of the county's public health department. I explained the entire shocking situation in detail and emailed him the audio recording I had discreetly made on my smartphone during Blacknut's dangerous misinformation session. Within 3 hours, he called me back with his voice tight with professional concern and barely controlled anger about the public health implications. Rebecca, this situation is far more serious and widespread than you initially realized, he said grimly. We've been actively investigating multiple disease outbreaks affecting 7 different school districts in our county, and 5 of those schools recently hosted classroom presentations or curriculum content featuring teachers spreading dangerous anti-vaccine misinformation to students and their families. We've documented over 30 cases where children have refused routine medical care, stopped taking prescribed medications for serious conditions, or avoided necessary treatments because teachers convinced them that modern medicine was dangerous conspiracy designed to harm rather than heal them, Dr. Park continued with increasing urgency. We're seeing measurable increases in preventable injuries and illnesses directly linked to misinformation being systematically spread in educational settings by unqualified instructors. Dr. Park asked if I would be willing to file formal complaints with the State Education Department, the State Medical Board, the CDC, the Attorney General's Office, and the Department of Health and Human Services. I immediately agreed without hesitation, understanding that this was about far more than just one problematic teacher spreading dangerous nonsense to impressionable teenagers. He connected me with Sarah Mitchell, an experienced attorney who specializes in educational malpractice cases involving public health dangers and constitutional violations. Sarah had previously won major cases against schools that failed to protect students from harmful misinformation and dangerous teaching practices that violated students' rights to accurate education. Sarah listened carefully to my detailed account and thoroughly reviewed my recorded evidence along with Blacknut's official curriculum materials that I had photographed during my classroom visit. Dr. Smith, this represents a massive liability nightmare for the school district, she explained during our first meeting at her downtown law office. If even one child gets seriously injured, develops a preventable disease, or dies following this teacher's dangerous medical advice, the district faces wrongful death lawsuits potentially worth tens of millions of dollars, Sarah continued with the confidence of someone who had successfully prosecuted similar cases. The legal precedent is absolutely clear that schools have a fundamental duty to provide accurate information to students, especially regarding health and safety matters that could affect their well-being. She agreed to represent me pro bono because she had 3 children in various schools throughout the district and was absolutely horrified by what she had heard on my recordings. This isn't just about one problematic teacher spreading conspiracy theories, she explained. This represents a systemic failure to ensure educational quality, student safety, and institutional accountability at multiple levels of administration. Meanwhile, I began systematically reaching out to other parents in Sophia's grade level and throughout Lincoln High School using every contact method available. I created a private Facebook group called Evidence-Based Education for Our Children and started methodically inviting every parent whose contact information I could obtain through school directories, social media connections, and personal networks. Within 24 hours, our group had grown to over 80 concerned members sharing their own disturbing experiences. Within 48 hours, we had more than 200 parents joining and contributing increasingly alarming stories. Within 1 week, we had over 900 parents from multiple schools throughout the district sharing their children's reports of dangerous misinformation being taught as fact. The stories that began pouring into our Facebook group were absolutely horrifying and heartbreaking in their scope and consistency. Parents discovered that Blacknut had apparently been spreading dangerous medical misinformation, anti-science conspiracy theories, and harmful pseudoscientific nonsense for years without any meaningful oversight, accountability, or administrative intervention to protect students. One mother, Jennifer Walsh, shared a devastating story about her 16-year-old daughter who had stopped taking prescribed asthma medication after Blacknut convinced his health class that pharmaceutical companies deliberately created fake diseases and manufactured dangerous drugs to sell unnecessary treatments to healthy people for maximum profit. The girl had suffered a severe asthma attack 2 weeks later that required emergency hospitalization and nearly resulted in respiratory failure that could have been fatal. Another parent reported that their diabetic son had refused his life-saving insulin injections for 4 terrifying days because Blacknut taught his class that type 1 diabetes was caused by poor dietary choices, negative thinking patterns, and spiritual weakness, and could be completely cured through prayer, positive visualization, and expensive herbal supplements purchased from his personal website. Lisa Taylor shared that her daughter with clinically diagnosed depression had stopped taking prescribed antidepressant medication and quit therapy sessions after learning from Blacknut that mental illness was simply a character flaw and sign of spiritual weakness rather than a legitimate medical condition requiring professional treatment and evidence-based interventions. The girl had attempted suicide just 2 weeks later and was currently hospitalized in the psychiatric ward. The disturbing stories continued pouring into our group at an alarming and accelerating rate. parents discovered their children had learned that climate change was an elaborate hoax perpetrated by grant-seeking scientists, that the Holocaust death toll was deliberately exaggerated by Jewish conspirators seeking sympathy and financial reparations, that the moon landing was staged by NASA in a television studio, and that the September 11th terrorist attacks were orchestrated by the U.S. government as a false flag operation to justify military interventions. Even more troubling and psychologically damaging, parents found out that Blacknut had been systematically teaching girls that they were biologically and intellectually inferior to boys in virtually every meaningful capacity. He had told female students they couldn't excel in mathematics and science due to genetic limitations, that their primary biological purpose was reproduction rather than career achievement, and that feminism was a dangerous ideology that went against natural law and divine design. Dr. Park attended our first official parent meeting at the community center, which had to be moved to the high school auditorium due to overwhelming attendance. He brought thick folders of scientific data about vaccine-preventable diseases, traffic safety statistics, evolutionary biology evidence, climate change research, and peer-reviewed studies on evidence-based adolescent health education from major research universities worldwide. What Mr. Blacknut has been systematically teaching your children for years isn't merely incorrect, outdated, or misguided. Dr. Park explained to the overflow crowd of nearly 800 concerned parents who had packed the auditorium beyond its official capacity. It's actively, demonstrably, and dangerously harmful to their physical health, mental well-being, intellectual development, critical thinking abilities, and future educational and career opportunities. We organized quickly and efficiently with the desperate urgency of parents protecting their children from immediate and ongoing danger. Sarah helped us file comprehensive formal complaints with the State Board of Education, the Teaching Standards Commission, the Attorney General's Office, the State Health Department, the Federal Department of Education's Office of Civil Rights, and the CDC's Emerging Misinformation Response Team. Dr. Park contacted investigative journalists at multiple television stations and major newspapers throughout the region and state. Parents began requesting emergency meetings with individual school board members, flooding their offices with phone calls, emails, and formal written complaints demanding immediate action to protect students. I compiled a detailed 203-page report documenting every piece of dangerous misinformation Blacknut had taught over the years, complete with peer-reviewed medical research refuting each harmful and potentially deadly claim. The school board initially attempted to circle the wagons and protect their popular teacher from what they characterized as an organized attack by disgruntled parents who didn't understand the complexity of modern education. Board President Linda Walsh issued a defensive public statement calling Blacknut a dedicated educator with decades of valuable experience who encourages students to think critically about complex issues rather than passively accepting mainstream narratives without question or intellectual curiosity. But when Channel 7's Emmy-winning investigative team picked up our story after receiving anonymous tips from multiple sources within the school district, everything changed practically overnight in ways none of us could have anticipated or prepared for. The television segment was scheduled to air during Thursday evening's primetime newscast, reaching over 600,000 viewers throughout the metropolitan area and beyond. Reporter Michael Santos conducted extensive interviews with me outside Lincoln High School, with Blacknut outside his suburban home, with Dr. Park at the county health department, with Sarah at her law office, and with dozens of outraged parents during our packed community center meetings. The contrast between professional medical expertise and Blacknut's conspiracy theories was stark, damaging, and impossible to ignore. Blacknut looked absolutely terrible on camera, sweating profusely under the bright studio lights, stammering defensively, avoiding direct questions about his qualifications, and insisting that the corrupt medical establishment and powerful pharmaceutical industry were orchestrating a coordinated attack to silence his legitimate alternative scientific research and constitutional right to educational freedom. The story exploded across social media platforms within hours of the Thursday evening broadcast, spreading far beyond our local community. Facebook groups throughout the state shared it thousands of times with angry comments demanding accountability and justice for affected children. Twitter users tagged the state education department, the governor's office, national education reform organizations, and major news outlets. YouTube channels dedicated to debunking medical misinformation featured our story in viral videos that accumulated millions of views within days. By Friday morning, the state education department had announced a formal investigation into Blacknut's teaching practices and curriculum content. By Monday afternoon, 3 school board members were publicly demanding Blacknut's immediate suspension pending the investigation's completion. By Wednesday, parents from 12 different school districts were showing up at board meetings, demanding to know if their children had been receiving similar dangerous misinformation from other unqualified teachers. But the real bombshell that completely changed the trajectory of the case dropped Thursday morning when Channel 7's investigative team revealed that Blacknut had been secretly supplementing his teaching salary by selling unregulated herbal supplements, essential oils, homeopathic remedies, and natural health products through a sophisticated website called Pure Truth Wellness Solutions. The supplements, which Blacknut had been aggressively marketing as safer and more effective alternatives to vaccines and prescription medications, had never been tested for safety or efficacy by any legitimate scientific organization or regulatory agency. Independent laboratory analysis commissioned by Channel 7 revealed they contained ingredients not listed on their labels, including potentially dangerous heavy metals, unlisted pharmaceutical compounds, and contaminated plant materials. Records obtained through public information requests showed that Blacknut had been earning over $85,000 annually, selling these products directly to parents and students who trusted his authority as an educator and health teacher. He had been systematically promoting these supplements during class time, telling students to ask their parents about natural alternatives to dangerous conventional medical interventions while failing to disclose his financial interest in the products. The FDA immediately launched a criminal investigation into Blacknut's supplement business, treating it as an unlicensed pharmaceutical operation that violated multiple federal regulations. Federal agents executed a dawn raid on his home, seizing computers, financial records, customer databases, inventory, and boxes of unlabeled products. The investigation quickly revealed he had been operating without proper licenses, tax documentation, safety protocols, or quality control measures. Wednesday brought another devastating revelation that shocked even seasoned investigators familiar with educational fraud cases. Channel 7's research team discovered that Blacknut's natural wellness certification came from an online diploma mill called Global Health Institute that had been shut down by federal authorities for widespread fraud 3 years earlier. Investigation revealed that the institute had sold over 10,000 fake certificates to individuals seeking to appear qualified in health-related fields without any actual education, training, or competency testing. Blacknut had paid $500 for a certificate that he used to justify teaching health classes to impressionable teenagers for nearly 2 decades. His only legitimate educational credential was a bachelor's degree in physical education from 1985, nearly 4 decades old and completely unrelated to health education, medical science, biology, chemistry, anatomy, physiology, or any field requiring knowledge of evidence-based medicine or scientific methodology. For over 18 years, he had been teaching health, biology, anatomy, wellness, and even some chemistry classes while possessing absolutely no medical training, scientific education, health-related qualifications, or legitimate credentials whatsoever. Even worse, district records showed that multiple parents and teachers had filed formal complaints about his misinformation over the years, but administrators had consistently dismissed these concerns without proper investigation or accountability measures. The story continued growing nationally as major news outlets picked up the scandal and began investigating similar cases in other states and communities. CNN featured our case in a special primetime report about unqualified teachers spreading dangerous misinformation in public schools nationwide. The Washington Post published a scathing front-page editorial about the crisis of anti-science education, undermining public health and student welfare. The New York Times interviewed me for a comprehensive investigative piece about the erosion of educational standards and the systematic infiltration of conspiracy theories into public school curricula. The story was shared over 75,000 times on social media platforms and sparked intense national conversations about teacher qualifications, curriculum oversight, and institutional accountability. Dr. Anthony Fauci mentioned our specific case during congressional testimony about combating medical misinformation in educational settings and protecting vulnerable populations from harmful pseudoscience. The American Medical Association issued a formal statement supporting parents who challenge dangerous misinformation in schools and calling for stricter teacher qualification standards. Emergency school board meetings overflowed with hundreds of furious parents demanding immediate answers and concrete action to protect their children. The high school auditorium, which normally held 900 people, was packed beyond capacity with overflow crowds watching on closed-circuit television in the gymnasium, cafeteria, library, and even some classrooms. My daughter stopped wearing her seatbelt because of this teacher's lies, and she was critically injured in a car accident last month that could have been completely prevented if she had been wearing proper safety restraints. One father shouted emotionally into the microphone during public comment, his voice breaking with grief and anger. My son thinks his autism is my fault because of the vaccine misinformation this man systematically taught him and his classmates. Another mother cried while holding her child's hand, tears streaming down her face. He won't even look at me the same way anymore because he believes I poisoned him as a baby. My daughter quit the track team and stopped participating in athletics entirely because Blacknut told her girls are naturally weaker and shouldn't compete with boys, testified a parent whose daughter had been a promising athlete with college scholarship potential. She went from confident and strong to believing she was biologically inferior because of what this man taught her about female capabilities. The school board voted unanimously to suspend Blacknut immediately pending the investigation's completion. Principal Davis announced that all health and science curriculum would be thoroughly reviewed and approved by licensed medical professionals and PhD scientists before implementation. The district also agreed to bring in actual doctors, nurses, and qualified scientists for future health education, rather than continuing to rely on unqualified teachers with fake credentials and dangerous beliefs. But Blacknut wasn't finished fighting for his career, reputation, and lucrative supplement business that had provided him with substantial additional income. He showed up at the next board meeting accompanied by an expensive attorney from a firm specializing in education law and carrying a petition signed by 89 parents who still supported him, despite the overwhelming evidence of his misconduct and fraudulent behavior. He dramatically claimed his First Amendment rights were being systematically violated through political persecution by the liberal medical establishment seeking to silence conservative viewpoints and alternative perspectives. His attorney argued that Blacknut was presenting legitimate alternative scientific perspectives, and that silencing him constituted dangerous censorship that threatened academic freedom and intellectual diversity in public education. Sarah stood up during the public comment period, carrying a massive stack of medical journals and research papers from prestigious universities, including Harvard, Yale, Stanford, Johns Hopkins, the Mayo Clinic, and the World Health Organization. There are no legitimate alternative scientific viewpoints about whether vaccines cause autism, whether evolution is scientifically valid, whether seatbelts save lives, or whether girls are biologically capable of upper body strength, she declared firmly to the packed auditorium. The scientific consensus on these issues is absolutely clear, comprehensive, and overwhelming after decades of rigorous research involving millions of subjects worldwide, she continued with increasing intensity. Teaching children that evidence-based medicine and established scientific facts are dangerous conspiracies isn't protected free speech or legitimate academic freedom. It's educational malpractice that directly endangers students' lives, violates their constitutional right to receive accurate education, and constitutes fraud when combined with secret financial interests. The state investigation took 16 grueling weeks as investigators interviewed over 700 students from Blacknut's classes spanning 12 years, reviewed thousands of his lesson plans and teaching materials, consulted with medical experts from 9 major research universities, and analyzed curriculum content for accuracy, safety, and compliance with educational standards. Their final 410-page report was absolutely devastating to Blacknut's career, reputation, and legal standing. The investigation revealed that he had been systematically teaching scientifically inaccurate and dangerous information about vaccines, medications, mental health treatment, evolutionary biology, climate science, basic anatomy, reproductive health, traffic safety, and fundamental scientific methodology throughout his entire teaching career. More troubling, investigators discovered he had been deliberately sourcing his curriculum from conspiracy theory websites, discredited documentaries, anti-vaccine propaganda groups, and social media forums specifically dedicated to promoting dangerous medical misinformation and scientific denial. He had regularly shown students videos claiming HIV doesn't cause AIDS, that fluoride in drinking water causes brain damage and government mind control, and that chemotherapy kills more cancer patients than it saves. Students reported that Blacknut had systematically taught them that climate change was an elaborate hoax perpetrated by scientists seeking research grants, that the Holocaust death toll was deliberately exaggerated by Jewish conspirators seeking sympathy and reparations, that the moon landing was staged by NASA in a television studio, and that the September 11th terrorist attacks were orchestrated by the U.S. government as a false flag operation to justify military interventions and reduce civil liberties. The psychological damage to students was extensive, long-lasting, and heartbreaking in its scope and severity. School counselors reported a dramatic 500% increase in students requesting mental health support after learning that their trusted teacher had been systematically lying to them for years about fundamental aspects of science, medicine, and reality itself. Many teenagers struggled with profound confusion, anxiety, depression, and paranoid distrust about what information they could believe from authority figures including parents, doctors, teachers, and other professionals. The systematic undermining of trust in expertise and evidence-based thinking had created a generation of students vulnerable to conspiracy theories and dangerous misinformation. The state board permanently revoked Blacknut's teaching certificate and placed him on a national database that prevented him from working with children in any educational, childcare, youth organization, or tutoring capacity anywhere in the United States. The detailed investigative report stated that his systematic spread of dangerous misinformation posed clear and present danger to student health, safety, psychological well-being, intellectual development, and future educational success. The school district immediately terminated Blacknut's employment contract for cause, which meant he forfeited his pension, health benefits, accumulated vacation time, sick leave, severance package, and all other employment benefits accumulated over 18 years. Principal Davis was demoted to a regular classroom teaching position with no administrative responsibilities after investigators found she had systematically ignored multiple warning signs and dismissed legitimate parent complaints without proper investigation. Blacknut's legal troubles were just beginning to unfold in ways that would completely destroy his life, finances, and reputation. The FDA imposed a $300,000 fine for selling unregulated supplements and ordered him to immediately cease all sales and destroy remaining inventory. The state attorney general filed multiple felony fraud charges related to his fake credentials, systematically misleading parents about his qualifications, and operating an unlicensed pharmaceutical business while using his position of trust to target vulnerable customers. The criminal trial lasted 10 weeks and made headlines nationwide as the first major prosecution of an educator for spreading dangerous misinformation while secretly profiting from alternative health products sold to the same families he was systematically misinforming. Federal prosecutors presented overwhelming evidence that Blacknut had knowingly spread false medical information while deliberately profiting from supplement sales to parents and students who trusted his authority. After 4 days of deliberation, the jury found Blacknut guilty on 26 felony counts including fraud, child endangerment, operating an unlicensed business, false advertising, tax evasion, and conspiracy to distribute unregulated pharmaceuticals. The judge sentenced him to 5 years in federal prison, followed by 4 years of supervised probation. During sentencing, the judge specifically stated that educators who abuse their trusted position to spread dangerous misinformation while secretly profiting from that misinformation must face serious consequences to protect children and maintain public trust in educational institutions. Blacknut was also ordered to pay $750,000 in restitution to affected families and banned from any contact with minors. 2 years later, our advocacy efforts had led to comprehensive educational reforms throughout the state. Dr. Foster's evidence-based health program became a model adopted by over 80 school districts. Vaccination rates increased dramatically, student scientific literacy improved significantly, and most importantly, children learned to evaluate health claims based on evidence rather than authority figures or conspiracy theories. Sophia graduated as valedictorian with a full scholarship to study pre-med at Stanford. During her graduation speech, she thanked me for teaching her to question unqualified authority figures and showing that parents must protect their children's education from those who would exploit trust for personal gain.